Good afternoon and welcome to this session on sharing experiences on natural capital valuation at landscape level for nature positive investment. So my name is Chantal Van Am. I'm Senior Biodiversity and Natural Capital Expert at Arcadis, and we have organized this session jointly with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the Landscape Finance Lab. And in this session, we would like to zoom in on the experiences that we have with natural capital valuation at landscape level, a model that has been developed over the past 2 years and has been also piloted and tested. And it's mainly aiming at assessing the risks of ecosystems, but also the opportunities and how this can bring us to upscaling nature-based natural capital, nature-positive investments at a landscape scale. As the Dutch Minister of Finance, Sigrid Kaag, said during the opening of the summit, there is a need for upscaling action and to identify the best sustainable bang for our buck. And I think we believe that this model can help to identify such nature-positive investment opportunities. So I would like to introduce you to our outstanding panel of speakers for this session. So I'll introduce them to you one by one. Hannah Wood, who is the Director for Climate and Environment at the UBS Optimus Foundation. My colleague Johan Lammerand, who is Lead Expert Natural Capital and Biodiversity at Arcadis. Marshall Geck, who is Principal Green Economy Specialist at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Paul Chatterton, Lead and Founder of the Landscape Finance Lab. Angelica Dalen, Global Head of Impact Investing at Mercer. And Owen Bethel, who is Environmental Impact Lead, Global Public Affairs at Nestlé. So on this slide, you can see our agenda for the hour and a half that we have. And we will start with a few presentations that give you more insight in what natural capital valuation is, which challenges it can address, but also how it has been applied in practice through the natural capital valuation model. And we'll look at what the value is of natural capital at landscape level and what current financing mechanisms there are for taking action. There will also be time for your questions, of course, during the session. And after the presentations, we will continue with an interactive dialogue where we will invite our speakers from Mercer, UBS Optimus Foundation, and Nestlé to join here as well to give us their insights in how natural capital valuation can help them in their business and financing activities. Yeah, without further ado, I would like to invite Marshall Geck from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development to open the presentation.
Thank you, Chantal. And thank you to all of you for joining this introductory session on natural capital valuation and the EBRD's natural capital valuation model. For those of you who don't know, the EBRD is the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. We're a multilateral development bank headquartered in London, and we invest in development projects in the southern and eastern Mediterranean, Central Asia, and Middle East and Northern Africa. My name is Marshall Geck. I'm a Green Economy Specialist Principal at the bank, and since joining there in November of last year, I've been involved in many of the bank's efforts to mainstream the protection and enhancement of nature into our operations. And the NCV model is an emerging risk management tool that we have been exploring in order to do just that, and it's central to our efforts to properly value nature. So here's a quick overview of the agenda and what I plan to go over. The first thing I'm going to do is just provide you a quick introduction to what natural capital and natural capital valuation are. I'll then give you a overview of what the EBRD's NCV model is, NCV meaning natural capital valuation. I'll then turn it over to Johan at Arcadis to tell you about how the NCV model works. And then lastly, I will give you a case study from one of our pilot NCV assessments, which was focused on a wastewater treatment plant in the Namangan region of Uzbekistan, which was along the Sirdarya River. So let's just start with the basics here. What is natural capital? Why should we care about it? As defined by the Natural Capital Protocol, natural capital is the stock of renewable and non-renewable natural resources, for example, plants, animals, air, water, soils, minerals, etc., that combine to yield a flow of benefits to people. Now, there's other definitions out there, but the bottom line is that nature provides value to human society. And assessing that value and the services that nature provides is fundamental to making decisions about how to use nature or invest in it wisely. And to a large degree, the current global biodiversity and nature crises we're facing today is in large part due to a failure to properly value natural capital. A lot of times we just think of them as free inputs. For example, clean air, clean water. If we think that those are things that are just given to us as completely free, then we're not likely to treat them very well or to give them the value they deserve. And as you know, that's not working for the planet that we live on. And on top of that, more than ever before, the world is expecting greater transparency and understanding from financial institutions on their impacts and dependencies, as well as their nature-related risks and opportunities. So, for example, at COP26 in November of 2021, a group of MDBs, multilateral development banks, signed the Joint Statement on Nature, People, and Planet, committing them to mainstream nature into their operations. And pillar number 4 of that specifically committed them to properly valuing natural capital. And then, of course, the Global Biodiversity Framework, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, it set a target to fully integrate the value of biodiversity into socioeconomic activities. That was target 14. So in addition to that, the GBF set targets to ensure that large financial institutions like the EBRD regularly monitor and assess and transparently disclose the risks, dependencies, and impacts on biodiversity. That's target 15, as well as mobilize $200 billion annually for the enhancement of nature by 2030. That was target 19. And I'm sure if you were at this conference in the past couple of days, you've heard of something called the TNFD. TNFD is working to standardize and mainstream disclosure on nature-related risks and opportunities. And TNFD does stress the importance of translating nature-related risks into financial terms. Why do I bring all this up? I bring it up because the direction of travel is towards a nature-positive economy which properly incorporates the value of nature. So large financial institutions like the EBRD and others would do well to take note of these trends and get ahead of them rather than standing on the sidelines and falling behind. So what is natural capital valuation then? Essentially, it's trying to ascribe a value to those things that to date we've largely taken for granted, like I said, clean air, clean water, and make them visible. So natural capital valuation facilitates an understanding of the costs of inaction, so doing nothing, under business as usual usually, but also the benefits of action, so identifying what nature-related risk management actions and investment opportunities at the landscape would have the most positive impact for nature. More specifically, it attempts to treat nature the same as conventional economic assets that provide a flow of value by putting them in the same economic accounting units. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't say that this can sometimes be a controversial notion. So, for example, if you believe that nature has intrinsic value and it's just impossible to put a price on it, you might not like this idea so much. But again, the idea here is to try to ascribe a value to and make visible those inputs that for so long we've largely just taken for granted. Okay, so now you understand the foundations and the background. What is the NCV's or the EBRD's NCV model? So it's not by sheer omission that financial institutions haven't taken the value of natural inputs into account. It's also because it's just quite complicated, to be honest with you. And a key challenge to properly valuing nature-related risks and identifying nature-benefiting investment opportunities is that these are highly context-dependent and highly localized. So a hectare of land in the Arctic is very different from a hectare of land in the Amazon, for example. And this makes it really difficult to consistently appraise or translate the impacts of financial activities on nature, be they positive or negative, from one landscape to another. So to address this gap, MDBs, along with Arcadis, in the summer and spring of 2022, jointly developed a natural capital valuation model, which was based on existing frameworks in the nature space, such as UNCIA, TNFD, and SBTN. And what emerged was our NCV model. So at its core, the NCV model is a tool that identifies, prioritizes, and substantiates nature-related risks and investment opportunities within a particular landscape, translating them into economic terms using a standardized framework. It provides qualitative, and where possible, monetary information on the current and evolving state of nature in a particular landscape of interest. And when I say evolving, I mean under different scenarios, as well as the related risks and opportunities for nature, local communities, and local businesses and investors in the landscape. And the ability to do all this within a standardized framework is one of the key selling points for all the reasons I mentioned on the previous slide, the difficulty of translating nature-related risks and opportunities from one landscape to another. And as I mentioned also on the previous slide, another key selling point is that it was designed to be aligned with emerging frameworks in the nature space, such as TNFD and SBTN. So, EBRD has done several NCV pilot studies with the model to date. You can see them all listed on this slide here. I'm not going to go through all of them. However, I will give you a case study, as I mentioned, on our latest pilot study towards the end of the presentation. Suffice it to say from this slide that we've been testing the NCV model on a number of different landscapes under a number of different conditions to see what it can do and trying to build up our expertise in natural capital valuation with it. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Johan from Arcadis, who will tell you a little bit more about how this lovely model I just went over actually works.
Hello everybody. I will give you some more insights in what this NCV model now actually is. And maybe to start with, and Marshall already told it, it's very important. The context is a nature-positive direction. What does it mean? We try to simplify this idea, this target, in fact, into this diagram. We think that, and you should consider this at a landscape level. So, for instance, a river basin or part of a river basin or even a city. To achieve nature positive, you need to reduce pressures on nature. That's one thing, and that's what the current investing by many financial institutions is focusing on. It's about energy savings, it's about wastewater treatment, solid waste treatment, and so on. But you need to do more than that. You also need to increase the resilience of ecosystems, and this is the more innovative type of financing, and that has been discussed during this conference, during many occasions, innovative financing of nature restoration, where financial institutions are a bit less familiar with. But you need both, because you need to achieve in a nature-positive situation, you need this greening finance, but also this financing green. What we do in our approach, and it's not rocket science, it's just logical thinking. We start from a baseline. We built the baseline, we try to understand the landscape, and we position this baseline somewhere on this diagram. It's now very illustrative, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But for instance, here you see the baseline is somewhere in the yellow and the light green zone. And then we apply scenarios. We always apply the business as usual scenario, which means nothing happens. Things are going on as they have gone on in the past. So no investments at all in nature restoration or nature recovery. And then the business as usual scenario comes somewhere, in this case, and it's different from case to case, of course, in the red and yellow zone. While a nature positive scenario is an ideal scenario where you have all the appropriate investments in place to achieve nature positive. And that's the thing. EBRD and other multilateral development banks want to know, they want to see the gap between the current or the business as usual situation and an ideal nature positive situation. This is the simplified version of the whole NCV model. In essence, it consists of three main parts. The first one is the baseline, building the baseline. It's trying to understand the landscape. What does it mean? It's about extent and condition of ecosystem types in the landscape. So we try to collect information. It's very much inspired, as Marshall said, on the SEA, the System for Environmental Economic Accounting, which uses this concept, extent and condition of ecosystem types. But more than that, we also try to collect information on the stakeholders in the landscape, who is affecting these ecosystems and who is depending on these ecosystems. This is all crucial information to understand natural capital risks. And based on this combination of information, we identify the key natural capital risk teams in a landscape. And the priority ecosystem services in a landscape. And this can be different from landscape to landscape. And then we go to the risk assessment part. And the risk assessment part, and I think that's quite unique, although it's also logical, but it's based on the concept of thresholds and distance to thresholds. So when we say thresholds, it resonates with planetary boundaries. What is the capacity of the local environment that should not be exceeded by human activity? Where can we find information on those thresholds? Can be environmental thresholds, legal thresholds, even health thresholds like air quality for a local population. And we explore literature, we talk with stakeholders to find what's the actual situation. How far are we away from those thresholds? And that's the basis for a risk scoring. So the risk scoring is essentially based on this ecosystem capacity and how far you have already used this local capacity. And as I said, we apply scenarios. Because we understand the landscape, we know if there will be population increase, if there will be an intensification of agriculture, if tourism will expand, and so on, which will make, of course, the situation much, much worse. On top of that, we apply the knowledge of climate scenarios. We don't apply complicated mathematical climate scenarios. We just use the information that everyone can access on what will happen in the landscape in the next decades. Will it get drier, will it get warmer, and so on. So we'll combine this information. It's very much also based on expert judgment, expert interpretation. And as I said, we use different scenarios, and the outcomes are then presented as risk scores from 1 to 4, but also we use SDG indicators, because that for the bank, that's important. For a multilateral bank, it's important because that's in their goals. They need to achieve the SDGs. So also we try to collect information on social and economic indicators apart from the natural capital indicators. We can include a stakeholder consultation, which we have done so far for all the pilots, and which is also very useful, of course, and which is a basic principle of a good landscape level approach. And so we compare the scenarios. In terms of the risk scoring, we use the concept of a risk heat map, as is being done already for climate. We do just the same for natural capital, based on this distance to threshold concept, which is representative for the likelihood of a risk, and combined with the impact on local stakeholders, impact on nature, we come up with this diagram, which again gives a clear indication of what risk teams are should have the highest priority to deal with in the landscape. All this risk scoring is based on, as I said, there are no databases on natural capital risks, no global databases, as you know very well. So it requires some efforts to collect information. And we collect information on a series of indicators, all based on what we can find in literature. And therefore, these indicators can be variable from landscape to landscape, because sometimes an indicator is just not available in terms of data. So we try to use what we can find, and for instance, for this specific landscape, we came up with 56 indicators, and then we found information that allowed us to give a risk score, which is again an indication of the priority. In terms of now the outcomes, we present it in two ways. This is the dartboard diagram, where you see these risk levels going from red to dark green. Dark green is the best situation, and the more sustainable scenario. And then we put the different scenarios on it. So the baseline, the business as usual, and then the nature positive scenario for the different risk teams that we also try to link with the SDGs. Yeah, then this is my last slide, and then I hand over again to Marshall for a concrete case study. Now, in terms of decision making, what can you do with it? Now, there are two things. First of all, it's a risk assessment approach, which is, of course, very interesting for TNFD reporting, but also, of course, for prioritization of the actions that you take, because the understanding of the dependencies in the landscape allows you to come up with physical risks, due to climate change, due to ecosystem degradation, but also transition risks, because you know who are the other stakeholders in the landscape which can be affected by your activities, which creates reputational issues, license to operate issues. So this better understanding, and it's in this way much more accurate than any other risk assessment approach, which is much more based on modeling and on much more generic figures. Risk assessment, that's one thing, but we should not forget we are in a nature positive context. It's also about opportunities, and these opportunities can be nature-based solutions to de-risk your activities in the landscape, but it's also an opportunity to identify additional measures that you can take to increase nature, to increase the resilience of nature in the landscape, and to contribute to nature positive outcomes. About the monetization, we use it for ecosystem services, of course. We will not put a monetary value on a species or so. We use economic environmental valuation based on the principles of ecosystem services valuation. As you know, we cannot do that for every ecosystem service. We can do that for provisioning services, for some regulating services, based on value transfer very much, and there are useful ecosystem services value transfer databases available. Where we can have local data, of course, we use it, and it's interesting to compare the cost of non-action in a business as usual scenario, for instance, with the benefits of nature positive investments for some particular cases. It also allows informed decision making on joint action towards nature positive, because as you know, nature positive is not something that you will achieve on your own. You need to do that together with other actors in the landscape. So it's a collaborative effort, and also the model provides insight in that, especially also the stakeholder consultation. So I stop here in terms of the applications. I think I was clear. It's about prioritization of de-risking actions. It's about supporting nature positive transition plans. It's also very much about TNFD reporting, also CSRD reporting, because that's very similar. It's about science-based target setting, and for the financial institutions specifically, because the model should also be applicable to big corporates. It's about green scoring of projects and inputs to credit assessment decisions. Thank you. And now I hand over again to Marshall for a case study.
Hello again. Thank you, Johan, for explaining how the model works. I don't know about you, but I often find that it's much easier to understand something by seeing a concrete example than simply talking about it in the abstract. So luckily, we have included a case study today. I will just first preface this by saying that it is going to be a bit of a whirlwind case study. There is quite a bit of detail behind our NCV pilot assessment that I'll be presenting, but hopefully it will at least help to make this a little bit more tangible, compared to what you've just heard. So the EBRD's latest NCV pilot study focused on a wastewater treatment plant, as I mentioned, in the Namangan region of Uzbekistan. And because there was already an existing project that was in the landscape, this is a good example of using our NCV model for the purposes of enhanced due diligence. So step number one of the NCV model, as Johan said, is to establish the baseline. So to do that, the consultants, Arcadis, had to set the boundaries of the landscape they would be looking at. And they did that by taking a number of things into consideration. For example, the location of the wastewater treatment plant. They also considered the flow of the Sirdarya River, along which the wastewater treatment plant will be located and would be discharging its treated effluent. They also took into account the country borders of Uzbekistan. They took into account the economic activities along the river, so they could properly capture all the impacts that would likely be taking place there. And indeed, we knew the Sirdarya River to be under pressure, largely due to intensive agriculture, but also industrial and urban wastewater. So this is a good test study to see how well the model would appraise the ability of the wastewater treatment plant, but also other nature benefiting risk management actions to improve the situation there. So you've seen this before, but this is actually taken from the Sirdarya pilot study. And step two, as Johan said, was to move on to the risk assessment, having set the boundaries of the assessment area. So to do this, the consultants looked at a number of nature-related risk themes, a number of nature-related risk areas, and a number of indicators that would give you an idea of essentially the condition of the landscape and how its health, what was going on there. So those are all summarized in the table on the right here. As you can see, there's a lot of information there, so I don't recommend trying to absorb it all. I would instead recommend you to look at the summary at the bottom left. You see they looked at a total of 56 indicators, and 16 of those indicators came out with a risk score of 1. That's the most sustainable risk score. However, another 40 of them had a less sustainable score, and actually 32, the bulk of them, had the least sustainable score. And what this is all telling us is that actually the landscape around the Namangan wastewater treatment plant and around the Sirdarya River is facing some pretty substantial nature-related risks. So from that, this should look familiar to you as well. We were able to put together a risk heat map based on those key risk areas. You can see what they've done here is charted the risk impact, so the likelihood of the risk impacting the landscape to the actual likelihood of that risk occurring. And as you go further towards the top right, you can see those will be your most severe and likely risks. So in this particular case, water use and availability and water quality were determined to be the risk areas in the most severe state in the landscape around the Sirdarya River and Namangan wastewater treatment plant. And what this is telling us essentially is that if you're an investor like EBRD and you want to maximize the positive impact on the ecosystem services in the landscape, you would do well to focus on risk management actions that address the key risk areas towards the top right. So it's quite helpful in terms of prioritization. So having looked at the key risk areas, the consultants were then able to define potential investment areas that would help to address those risks, and then they ran a quantitative scenario analysis. So there's a lot going on here. It's another one that I don't recommend trying to absorb the whole thing, but I will just point out a few key features. So you'll notice at the far left that this particular potential investment area is focused on investment in wastewater treatment. And it's looking at what happens to the ecosystem services and the value of those ecosystem services in the landscape under 4 different scenarios. You can see at the far left there's a sustainable scenario, and that scenario was largely based on nature-related risks. There's also a project scenario, And that's the one that most closely corresponds to that wastewater treatment plant that the EBRD was looking at, and that's why we've put it in a red bar there. There's also a current state as well as a business as usual scenario. And at the very far right here, you can see they've aggregated or added up the total monetized benefits of all the ecosystem services in the landscape after having done the value transfer exercise that Johan mentioned, whereby you ascribe a monetary value to the ecosystem services in the landscape. So rather than look at that complex chart, I would encourage you to instead look at some of these key takeaways that I pulled out from it. So for the potential investment area of wastewater treatment on the previous slide, the total monetized benefits in US dollars we found were in the sustainable scenario, about 22.9 trillion. In the project scenario, a bit lower, 18.6 trillion. In the current state, about 17 trillion, and in the business as usual, lowest of all, of course, because business as usual is not working, as I mentioned, 12.8 trillion. Now, these numbers are probably pretty eyebrow-raising, quite large. One thing I will just explain to give a little bit more context is to help you understand them a bit better, is that these numbers are valorized over a 100 or 50-year time frame. So the landscape, for example, is not worth 22.9 trillion every single year. It's worth more like 1/100th of that. At the same time, you're not going to squeeze out every single last bit of value of ecosystem services in the landscape. I don't think that would be either desirable or something you'd want to do, or even possible, actually. What this does do, though, is it gives you an idea of the value at risk by sticking with the business as usual scenario. That's estimated at about 4.2 trillion. That's simply the difference between the current state, the total monetized benefits in the current state, and the total monetized benefits in the business as usual scenarios. What that's telling you is that the value of ecosystem services is potentially at high risk due to ecosystem service degradation over time. And what we've done is attempted to put a monetary value on just how much it's going to go down by. At the same time, the project scenario had potential to enhance the value of ecosystem services from the current state by about 1.5 trillion. Again, that's simply the difference in value between the project scenario, 18.6 trillion, and the current state, 17 trillion. So what that's telling you is if you're looking at a wastewater treatment plant and you want to know, well, how much is this going to improve the situation in the landscape? 1.5 trillion sounds like a decent return on investment. Of course, if we really wanted to capture more of the value in the landscape, though, we'd need to be looking at the sustainable scenario because obviously that's valued much higher. So what we've done here is we're demonstrating the monetary value of the wastewater treatment plant as well as other nature-related risk management actions and investment opportunities in terms of their potential to protect and enhance the ecosystem services in the landscape, or their return on investment, as it were. So how do you get there? How do you get to the benefits of the project scenario or that sustainable scenario focused on nature-based solutions that I mentioned? The last step of the NCV model, the third step, is to identify the priority risk management actions and investment opportunities to apply to that landscape. And you can see each of the ones that came out as priorities are included in the little tick boxes on this slide here. They're also summarized in the table at the bottom. What that table is also doing, just to give you a sense of the high-level indication of the bankability of those investments, is it also indicates whether they are going to expected to contribute to risk management, whether they're expected to contribute or result in some increased revenue, whether they're expected to result in some decreased costs, and whether they're applicable to the project, for example, the wastewater treatment plant, or the landscape at large. Again, that's just to give an indication of a high-level indication of the bankability of these projects. The table goes on. What it also shows is a high-level indication of the expected impact of these investment opportunities on the environment, the economy, and the sustainable development goals in that landscape. So you can imagine if you are a multilateral development bank like the EBRD and you have a mandate to develop projects that will facilitate positive transition in your countries of operation, including green transition, this could be quite helpful for demonstrating which projects you should be focused on most if you want to have if you want to have strong benefits for nature in your landscapes that you care about most. So, like I said, that was a whirlwind tour of that particular case study, but hopefully it gives you a much more concrete idea of how this NCV model actually works. And with that, I will give up the floor again and hand it over to Paul from the landscape finance.
Hello everyone, Paul Chatterton, Landscape Finance Lab. It's Wednesday afternoon after 3 days of conferencing. Let's just change the pace a little by playing a game, a very serious game, if I may. You don't have to play it. The stand up, if you invest, stand up everyone. Get it, stretch your arms out. Stay standing if you invest in nature-based solutions. If you invest at all in nature-based solutions. Okay, we've got a few investors. Stay standing if your nature-based solutions are more than 100 hectares. Yeah, we've lost a couple. Stay standing if they're more than 1,000. Stay standing if they're more than 100,000. Wow. Oh, look at this. Stay standing if they're more than 1 million. Okay, very interesting indeed. I'm asking those questions, because after 40 years of working in the conservation industry, the key realization is that nature works at the scale of 100,000 hectares and above. 1 million hectares is better. Pollination systems, ecosystem flows, migration systems, habitat connectivity. But we're not getting the money into the hundreds and thousands and millions. That's our challenge. So something to reflect on. I want to talk about the connection between the landscape approach and natural capital valuation. And I think, and landscapes are a very powerful way to take action at the scale of 1 million hectares. The other thing they do is take integrated action. So if you're working on a river basin, you also have to work on agriculture and forestry, the cities that are using the water and so on. So they get the actors to talk to each other and find synergies between each other. That's very powerful. NCV does that as well. And so hopefully that gives you more impact, more ability to connect back those threads of nature that make nature work. Whoops, we got the colouring all gone, but the NCV model is actually not quite the landscape approach. It's quite a powerful way of thinking about how to do the landscape approach in an area. And that's what I want to talk about. So we looked at the steps. We heard from the previous speakers the steps are to do a scenario analysis that tells you where some of the problems might be, where to focus your attention. And then this Johari window is very useful. What are the likely risks? What are their impacts? And it's those things up in that top right-hand corner that you want to focus on, particularly in the red zone. What are the likelihood and impact of positive actions that you can take as well? And looking at those and taking the ones in the top right corner. In building a landscape program, you want to do both. You want to address the top risks and take the top opportunities and combine them together. And we want to find perhaps ways of integrating action on a couple of these diamonds in the top right-hand corner. So there's a challenge. But the NCV, sorry, I'm going, oops, how do I go back? There we go. Oh my God. totally mess this up. Go back, how do I? Oh, bear with me. Keep going. There we go. So, thank you. Sorry about that. Oh, is this me messing this up as well? Yeah. So the NCV model gives you a way of seeing the big picture and deciding, and then the stakeholders, when they do the landscape approach, and here's the standard way now, or a standard way to do the landscape approach. I won't go into the details of this, but you can read these two books if you're interested. The NCV model gives you the top things to focus on, and then it's a question for the stakeholders in the landscape how to manage those challenges, how to make that work, how to realise that financial value that might be possible with the sustainability scenario. We heard about the Kyrgyzstan example. What's interesting there is that it's land-based runoff that's causing the problem, so how to address, so agriculture becomes the focus when you're dealing with water. So it does encourage you to work across sectors. When we looked at the Red Sea to test the NCV model, and it's that area up in the far right, you can see the shapefile, the focus was tourism and coral reefs, but in fact, one of the issues that came out was freshwater supply. They're quite critical. Freshwater flows are quite critical for coral reefs, funnily enough. So joining those pieces together, the freshwater and the reefs, to ensure tourism survives in the Red Sea was a critical realisation that came out of this. I just want to throw a couple of examples of million hectare plus landscape programs that are happening in the world as well. And as a thought exercise, think about how we could use NCV to take them further. This is a program in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's 14 million hectares of forest, the largest forest carbon project in the world. And the DRC government has identified that you don't have to do this across 26 provinces. You can do a program like that in 6 provinces only to reduce deforestation and prevent most of the emissions in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And that one program cost 170 million, but that's $1 billion roughly to save emissions in the Congo. It's about the cost of a motorway or a bridge or a very cheap aircraft carrier. So that's the sort of opportunity that you get. But NCV, if you applied NCV to this, you'd be not only looking at climate and biodiversity, you could look at other issues in that landscape, and then as you address the deforestation, you could start thinking about renewable agriculture or health issues or so, well, maybe not health issues, that's stretching it a bit. This is another program that we're just starting in the Brisbane River, where I was born in Australia. It's a 2.3 million hectare catchment. Last year, the floods there cost the city €5 billion. And the solutions are all concrete at the moment, dams and straightening river protections, but they're not working. It's pretty clear that nature-based solutions can slow down the water flow. That's replanting the water, replanting the river forest and planting koala forests on the hills so that you slow down the water flow and reduce the amplitude. So we're doing a major program there. Can we use the NCV methodology to make that more focused and bring all of the different investors together to think about how to combine their forces to get that larger action? We won't get the results if we just do it project by project, that's very clear. But if we do it consistently across the river basin, it might be possible. This is Scotland. This peatland here is in the very far northeast, the flow country, 400,000 hectares. It contains twice as much carbon storage as all of the woodlands of the United Kingdom combined. So it's a fabulous way to store, to address climate commitments that the UK government has made. But it's one of so we're studying work also down in Loch Lomond, and we asked Nature Scott, how many of these programs do you have to do to cover Scotland? They said maybe 5, perhaps 10, to cover the biodiversity and carbon of Scotland. Now this area, the Flow Country, is going to be the world's first World Heritage peatland area. So it will attract dramatic numbers of visitors and create an opportunity for financing nature conservation, but big landscape program strategy that way. There's now a universe of investment for landscape programs. You've got your nature-based solutions down that end. Combining those into a landscape makes sense, and there's lots of different examples of those. I gave you a few. We're now seeing investments across landscapes. The Dutch Fund for Climate and Development has invested across 10 landscapes around the world. And then you're seeing thematic funds like the Global Fund for Coral Reef that invests in multiple landscapes, the same action in multiple landscapes. So that's the type of universe that's starting to come. It's still very early days, I must say. So let me finish by just saying I think the NCV model is useful. If you're going to use it, don't do it alone. Don't do it again after someone else has done it. Do it together. Use the same one that someone else has done previously, and stick with it. And what it does is help us focus on the large-scale, long-term solutions, define investment priorities and the synergies between the actors, and create a baseline that we can then test our strategy against over time as we monitor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. You can stay here on the stage, and I would actually like to invite also all the other speakers and presenters to join us here. I think this gave us a very interesting in-depth view on what natural capital valuation is and how it can help us understand better what the risks and opportunities in a landscape are for nature positive investment. And I think especially the examples showed us what is really feasible. But I can imagine there may be some questions for clarification on what was presented. So please feel free to raise your hand and please introduce yourself. And if you can also tell us who you would like to address the question to. Sir, floor is to you.
Thanks so much. I just have my name is Chris.
I think you can click on the button for the microphone. Yes, please.
Hello. Oh, fancy. My name is Chris. I'm a student here at the Graduate Institute just across the street, so I'm here to just absorb a lot of information. In class, I know it's really difficult to put a monetary amount on X, Y, Z, anything. And I kind of had a question for the man on the left. You on the slides had an example of, say, 12 trillion over 100 years. And then you opened the conversation talking about how different land is worth different amount of money depending on where you're at, Antarctica versus Geneva, for instance. Can you walk us through a little bit of the process of how you put a monetary amount on different resources saved or other things? Thanks.
Hello? Yes. So essentially, you're correct. It's done using standard exchange value. So you are looking at the cost of what the item would be, the nature-related input would be worth had there been a market for it. A good example is that you might all be familiar with from the climate space is applying a carbon price or a social cost of carbon to carbon within trees or within the soil. And you're correct, it's not, it is inherently quite a difficult exercise because oftentimes you have to make a lot of assumption. Again, the benefits of the natural capital evaluation model is that it's taking what we've in our economic systems largely been thinking about as something that's just free or is often taken for granted and trying to understand how would that change our behavior? How would that change our investing processes if we actually ascribed a value to that? So it comes with its own set of issues, but like I said from the Sudaria case study, it helps to show, it helps to demonstrate the impact of a project that perhaps an investor wouldn't have otherwise considered because they just wouldn't have seen that value in the landscape at all in many cases. I actually might turn it over to Johan because I think he's more deeper into the methodology and probably has some good perspectives to offer on this as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very quickly. Don't focus too much on the amounts that have been shown. What we did for Sudaria, we compared a scenario with traditional grey infrastructure water treatment in investments with nature-based solutions water treatment investment, including wetlands creation and so on. And of course, when you roll that out over an entire landscape, you get to these high figures. So you should not compare with the cost of only this particular wastewater treatment plant. And I think this might take away a few of the concerns of the audience. Also, the basis for the monetization is very clear. Healthy ecosystems have a longer lifespan. So the net present value of ecosystem services generated by those ecosystems is much higher than degraded ecosystems, which have a shorter lifespan. And this can be calculated. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I've seen 3 more questions, so I'd like to bundle them and hear from you. Yes.
Yeah, I would be interested in the data collection, the technology that was used, or methodologies, like were people on the ground, or you used satellite imagery, eDNA, or stuff like that.
Thanks for the question. Maybe we take the other questions as well, and then we give answer in one go. There were 2 more questions. The lady here in the front.
This is brilliant. You might have the graveyard slot, but this is really mind-blowing. Is private finance using this yet?
Thank you for the question. I'll take 2 more questions, and then we go to the answers. Lady in front.
Yeah, I have more a question on the landscape approach. And we saw it applied on a specific project and saw the complexity of the landscape approach, that it's multi-stakeholder collaboration. So how do you see that applied in practice with who does the governance, who finances the whole landscape approach, and does the interconnection between the different stakeholders?
Thank you. And one more question here in the back.
Yes, thank you. Amy Mima from IATA. I have a question. Do you also include in your valuations the regulatory framework in this where your projects take place? So the emerging market raised around governance of the country? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we have questions on data collection methods and technology, whether it's being used by impact investors, the landscape approach, and emerging markets and how its governance mechanisms work. Do you want to start?
Yeah, maybe on the tools, on the mechanism. Well, at this moment, it's a series of Excel files. It's populated by satellite data on extent of ecosystem services, ecosystems. For the rest, it's based on literature review for the condition information. The stakeholders in the landscape. It's also relying on stakeholder consultations, so interviews with experts, also a formal stakeholder consultation to validate the outcomes. And the ESV database is also very much used. And for the rest, it's very much based on logical thinking, and making integrated thinking over the different aspects. Yeah. I don't know.
Do you want to add something on whether it's used by impact investors, Johan? Or perhaps Marshall?
Yeah, maybe someone else can.
Okay, yeah. Jonas?
I mean, I can start as one of the investors. So we're not using the model yet, but the reason why I'm sitting on the panel is we started the discussion and explore what's out there. From an investor perspective, there are 2 things to be considered. One, the fund universe, so how many investment funds are out there, and I can tell you there are not that many. On the direct side, we have more opportunities, and the challenge is right now to kick off the discussion about valuation, about investment opportunities, and increasing attention towards biodiversity in general. But maybe you can also say something in terms of using the tool.
Yeah, hi. So we're also not using the tool yet. I think what's interesting about this is the landscape approach from the top down. So there's been a lot of conversation over the last couple of days and beyond about valuing natural capital, biodiversity credits, all of this. And I think what's interesting about this is that it brings a lot of things together and enables that holistic approach. I'm a big fan of the landscape approach because of that, and I think this is a really interesting way of incorporating that into investment decisions and making sure that the communities on the ground are also being considered as well, because they're the ones that are living there within the landscape itself. So I think it's got a lot of potential.
Paul, do you want to add something more on the landscape approach?
Yes, the landscape approach, word of warning, don't do it. It's not for the faint-hearted unless you really have a big problem to solve. And you've got someone to hold it, an organisation in the landscape who's prepared to run with this for a decade, and a group of people who are going to run with them. And once you have that, magic happens. It really does. We know this as we build these with communities around the world. And it starts to get very serious as well. We're finding in Ireland and Scotland, we're now setting up legal entities, or those groups are setting up legal entities. They've got to sign their name on contractual obligations. And that changes it from being a social exercise to being a very serious commitment to long-term change.
Thank you. Marshall, would you like to add?
Yeah, I was going to just address the question of how we are thinking about integrating the NCV model into our operation. So at this point, as I mentioned, it's largely about experimentation and building expertise with the model, seeing what it can do. But having said that, we are also giving a lot of thought to, how do you do this on a more regular basis? How would you operationalize it much more systematically? And the short answer of where our thinking is at the moment, still evolving, is that you probably aren't going to do this for every single landscape that you invest in. It's a lot of work, as you see, and a lot of data to try to digest. What you might be more likely to do it in is priority landscapes. You have, for example, at the EBRD, we have certain countries of operation that we are always going to be investing in as part of our mandate. We have priority landscapes and priority areas within those countries that we know we want to try to create impact in. So that helps us to, if we're looking at trying to create positive impacts for nature, and we want to understand what would be the most impactful projects to enhance the ecosystem services in that particular priority landscape, the NCV model would be a really good tool to deploy to help us focus our efforts. So it's not something that you do with every single little investment that you're pushing through the bank. I think that would be too much work. But when you know you have a landscape you want to focus on, that's where, and you want to improve nature in that landscape, or if there's potentially really high nature-related risks in that landscape that you want to try to mitigate, and that's often the case in a lot of the EBRD's countries of operations where you have kind of a legacy of environmental degradation, this can be a good way to help you focus your efforts.
Thank you. Are there any further reflections on these questions that we just had?
I'll just maybe add quickly that it is a lot of work, but there's also an element of education and awareness as well within the investor community, because the recognition of the value of natural capital outside, effectively, this room is pretty limited, right? And I think the more of this that happens, and the more that these sort of figures are shown and people begin to understand what's involved in these projects and what the potential risks and opportunities are, I think that provides a lot more opportunity. So if you're thinking about not just maximizing the potential of your investment already, or the investors and the public funds that are already out there, but trying to access more sources of capital, be it public or private, this kind of thing is super useful, because people start to understand the value of what's out there and account for it accordingly in program design.
One thing that I want to add, so you are not obliged to do monetization of natural capital. It's a possibility that is offered by this model, because we are aware that not every institution is interested in the real monetization of natural capital, but it provides a basis for risk assessment. The risk scoring on its own is already very, very useful. And that's already a good basis for prioritizing your action. And also it provides an insight in the opportunities in the landscape. So the monetization, don't focus too much. That's a nice thing to have for those institutions that want to value it in a monetary way, but it's not a thing that's inherently part of the NCV model.
Thank you very much. I will come back to your question, but perhaps we can first turn to Angelica Delen and Hannah Wood and Owen Battle to hear how they see the value of natural capital valuation in their day-to-day business and financing activities. Angelica, please go ahead.
Maybe just to continue what Hannah said, outside building bridges, I would say the majority is still not considering natural capital or biodiversity as a high priority. And pretty sure that all of you are familiar with the SDG wedding cake from the Stockholm Resilience Center. So whenever you meet a corporate institutional investor, remind them how the setup is. And if you remember the 3 layers, and the first one is the biosphere, meaning climate, life on underwater, life on land, and water. And then it comes society and economy. And with that illustration, it's quite clear how dependent we are on a healthy biosphere. And by valuing the nature capital, we get the importance of understanding the risk if we do not consider the approach towards natural capital and creating the healthy ecosystem, as you said, Johan, because we need to understand that our well-being and sustainability depend on it. And natural capital and biodiversity is the most sensitive area compared to, I would say, even if climate change, of course, it's linked to it. But the thing is that if it's gone, right? I mean, we don't have technology that we can rebuild it super fast. So that's why at Mercer we started and kick off the discussion about biodiversity. We're in the middle of the discussion, and thanks to the team on the panel, we have now different ideas how we can approach it. We did not finish it, but I think the first way to recognize the importance is really to kick off the discussion with all the investors and make them aware how dependent we are on the healthy biosphere.
Thank you. Hannah.
I'm conscious of probably a bit of an echo chamber here, but what she said. But yeah, I mean, you know, Marshall said at the beginning, right? Like without valuing nature and internalizing that in what we do, there isn't really a future. I think we are where we are now because of the systems within which we work, right? Not valuing nature has led to the problem that we're in. So if we carry on doing what we've already been doing and expect a different outcome, I'm pretty sure someone cleverer than me said that that was a mad way to go. So what we need to do is upend the entire global system, she said casually. However, realistically, we don't have time to do that. Right? Like if we take climate, for example, we're looking at 2030 as a deadline. That's 74 months from today. So go home and think about that, because that is not very long. And so given the urgency that we're working within, we need to use the tools that we've got available to us. And one of those is the market. So how can we use the markets? How can we make people value what they're using already day to day? How can we make people pay? And I'm not saying make nature pay. That's super harsh. I'm saying make people pay for what we're using, right? Like we use it already. And somebody asked me today, does this mean that I'm going to have to pay for my clean air? Does this mean I'm going to get a tax from the government? Well, no, not directly, but brackets, yes, maybe. Maybe you are going to have to pay through increased municipal charges if they're going to replace the bus fleets with electric or something similar. So valuation of natural capital is something essential, really, for us to move forward. So Optimus, we do invest in natural capital projects. We invest in nature-based solutions at various different levels in land use and in coastal and marine ecosystems. And when we're looking at those investments, we're looking at, do they take account of this within the program design? And is this going to benefit the local communities in and around? And how can we support the ecosystem? And by that, I mean both types of ecosystem to enable this to grow. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Owen.
Okay. So thanks very much, first of all, for the opportunity to speak today. So I'm coming from a slightly different perspective, from the corporate side. So I'm from Nestlé, based just down the other end of the lake. So a short hop today for an international conference, which was a pleasure. And For us, I think that the starting point really is around the external pressure points that we face as a company. So we've frequently been in the public eye, both for good and bad reasons. We are a listed company, so investors are interested in what we're doing, in our financial performance. We're a significant economic actor, so governments look to us when they're thinking about industrial policy or growing their economies. And so we frequently deal with the outside world, and we are very highly attuned to what's happening, and it's kind of partly my job to respond to that dynamic and that outside pressure and to advise the company on its strategies for dealing with it. So if you go back about 15 years, we had a significant amount of noise around the deforestation topic, particularly in palm oil supply chains. And as a company, we responded to that by looking at vastly improving our traceability, identifying the hotspots where deforestation might have been taking place close to where we were sourcing, and to invest in projects to help stop that happen. And many of those projects were based on social factors, of course, so looking at farmer income, looking at opportunities for local communities. And that's just one example of where we've looked at a supply chain, increased our visibility over it, and then allocated investment to help address some of those issues. Quite often, I would say, looking at the social side first as a factor leading to nature degradation. Fast forward a little bit further, we get to 2019, we made a commitment to go to net zero emissions through scope 1, 2, and 3, and the big opportunity for us, alongside the risk management, is that nearly everything we have to do on climate is a nature-based intervention. So we're talking there about regenerative agriculture, around nature-based solutions, preventing deforestation, investing in reforestation and restoration. That's about 70 or 75% of our net zero objective. So getting that right means you deliver more than just carbon all the time. You're delivering nature-based benefits. You're delivering solutions for communities. Often they are the guardians of biodiversity in those areas anyway. And therefore, we look at things through a slightly different abbreviation, NIV, net impact value. So how much do we invest in a project, and what is the benefit coming out of that project when it comes to our climate roadmap? And we're moving now more into the space of measuring the co-benefits for nature and for communities as well. So I think when I first looked at this session and I thought about natural capital valuation, I thought, do we do that? And the more I've thought about it, the more I realized that we do, we just don't call it the same thing. So I think we're kind of working on the same agenda, and you know, there's a huge risk mitigation element when it comes to reputation, policy, business continuity, sourcing ingredients, etc. But there's also a big opportunity to deliver more than carbon. Thank you.
Thanks, Owen. If I may ask a question to you, as Nestlé, of course, sources its commodities from a diversity of landscapes in which multiple actors are present. How do you see the pathway towards the future, as we're talking here about building bridges to create more cooperation in that landscape? What would be required in order to build the bridge between the corporations that are active in the landscape and investors?
Yeah, so building bridges is what it's all about. So if we take an example of, again, palm oil, in Malaysia we have a collaboration with an organization called Lestari Capital, who have pooled around $500 million of investment to look at preventing deforestation risk across a landscape, and it's called the Rimba Collective. That is, I think, a great front runner of what could be possible across a much broader area. So I think we're really looking for those opportunities. We've identified 14 key priority landscapes where we want to invest our own money. But I think to really create the proper level of impact, your 1 million hectares level of impact, we need to have multiple players involved. And there's only so far you can really push a publicly listed company to invest for market factors that are out there. So we need to have this kind of pooled approach and bring in various different players.
Thank you. Hannah, if I can come back to you, you already mentioned, what is the potential to optimize the market, for natural capital financing. What do you think we can learn from the developments in the carbon markets?
Probably quite a lot. So the carbon markets, I mean, we are where we are now after, relatively speaking, a really long period of development, right? And the carbon market's been around for a long time. They've tripped over their own shoelaces on a number of occasions. I include myself in that. But pick themselves up and keep going. And every time you do that, you learn something. I think the criticism that's been ongoing, particularly in the last sort of 6 to 8 months, is no bad thing, right? Like every time the spotlight is on you, you go, oh, and you fix what was wrong in the first place. So the learning that's come from that is helping biodiversity. If you look at how long the TFCD took to get going, it's very late. TNFD got where they are now in like 2 or 3 years, which is relatively speaking super speedy. And I would hope that the nature markets will be able to do the same by learning what's gone on before. But, big proviso, the integrity piece, the data, the transparency is going to be key in all of this. And I think people know that now, right? We've got a lot more technology than we had before. We've got a lot more awareness than we have before. We also have a lot of the super cool things like citizen science, where they're using the technology on the ground with indigenous communities right from the beginning in program design. So I think all of these things are going to help with the development of this kind of market. I also think, so I could talk about this for a while, but I also think that it's being morphed and absorbed into the carbon market. So while there may be a separate strain of it, there will also be developments within the carbon market that incorporate nature and incorporate natural pricing in that as well. And I think that that's a positive development too.
Thank you, Anna. Yes, so Angelica, you mentioned already the opportunity there is for impact investors in natural capital, but that it still needs to grow. What would you consider the main challenges that need to be addressed most urgently?
As I mentioned at the very beginning, the investment universe from a fund perspective is quite small compared to other impact opportunities we are seeing in the market. And I think from an investor perspective, it doesn't matter how you start, just start. So the first part is really to understand natural capital and the importance. Education, as you mentioned, Hannah, is key, increasing awareness. Then, of course, you need to find a way from an investor perspective, the tools and the valuation. So that's why when I started on impact, the reason why impact was growing was because we were talking to each other, right? I mean, there were not so many investment opportunities out there. And how you get there is by talking to each other, bringing alliance, and that's by building bridges, right? In terms of get the understanding what's out there and start to combine investments. And of course, we need the positive impact metrics. From my investment perspective, I need to prove the outcome, right? I need the financial return at the same time, but also the positive outcome. And probably the biggest challenge right now is really from our perspective, as we're not a direct investor, we're a fund investor, is the limitation on the investment universe. So that's one part. And also the underestimated importance of biodiversity, natural capital, generally speaking. Europe is very focused on green transition, it's interconnected. It's there, of course, we need to connect all the dots. But at the same time, we are focusing on mainly energy and the green transition. I think it has to be, or it has to have the same priority when it comes. So including biodiversity, one part is really with regulation. So there is even if it's not, I would say, completed, the discussion on SFDR, but it starts with the pies in terms of there is biodiversity there. So risk assessment might be a way to understand what your investment portfolio is doing. So it's a lot of work. The journey just started. I just hope it will not take that long as it took for climate.
Thank you very much for sharing your views. I would like to go back to the question of this gentleman first and then open the floor for more questions.
Thank you so much. The conversation's been really insightful. I am Pranav, and I'm with a social impact measurement company called 60 Decibels. So this conversation's been entirely, very heavily focused on the nature side. We focus on measuring the social side. Sort of coming from that place, the one thing I was very curious about was the role of local communities, both in assessing the risk and the opportunities up front, as well as in benefiting equitably from the opportunities that result from it. So obviously there's that whole sort of question about how monetization happens, but once those opportunities have been identified, is there a way in which, those opportunities and the benefits, both the monetary ones if they exist, but also the natural capital benefits are equitably, shared and benefited by the local community because they are, as, I know you mentioned from Nestle that they are ultimately the stewards of that community. So, I mean, I know that both of you mentioned it, but would love to hear your perspectives and any others that you all have. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take some more questions and then come back to the panel. There's one here in the middle.
Yes, thank you. My question is to Marshall and Johan. I've understood that the
the NCV is under piloting and that it's not relevant for all projects and all perimeters. However, we've seen by the numbers that it changes dramatically the investment thesis for a project when used. So my question is, and I've also heard we only have 7 years, we all know we're in a rush. Is the intention, the end goal, once the model has been refined, approved, and used at scale, is the intention that now the way we make investment decisions at large is going to include a different discount rate or a different credit risk premium, irrespective of the type of investment, location, landscape, and eventually size if you don't want to create asymmetric markets?
Thank you. Thank you. We take one more question and then we come back to the panel. Please.
Thank you so much for an excellent panel. I have a question for Hannah regarding your comment on how carbon markets may develop subsections in which you could incorporate nature. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more around that? Is it around carbon credits that have different qualities that the market is going to appreciate more? Or is it about using other financial instruments tied to the credits? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe we start with that one, Hannah, and then we work back.
Okay, both probably. So there's already quite a few of the carbon credit standards which incorporate nature within them to a different degree, right? And I think over time that is becoming more and more rigorous, and those are being incorporated into more of the methodologies with more specialized outcomes. So that's one route that is, I think, likely to expand. There is also, alongside that, the burgeoning or nascent, or whatever word you want to use, biodiversity credit market itself. There was a really interesting debate on that yesterday, today, some point recently, which was really interesting, and I'm not sure, from my point of view, which way that's going to go. I think it is a tool. I think it will be used. To what extent, we will see, and I think that's very dependent on where the regulation and the policy frameworks lead us. But I think there's room for both. And I actually think it's not so much about room, it's about we need all the things, right? And so some things will suit some people and some things will suit others. So yeah, quick.
Thank you. Then maybe to you, Marshall, on the end goal of the model and investment decisions.
Sure. I can maybe just quickly address the stakeholder consultation question. Yeah, so as you saw from the diagram of the model that Johan featured earlier in his presentation, the NCV model does build in a stakeholder consultation component. All of the 6 pilot NCV assessments that the EBRD has conducted to date have had a stakeholder consultation. And that's important for, as you said, validating the findings, but also just making sure they have buy-in from the local communities and the people who are going to be most affected by any of those investments that end up taking place. The EBRD itself, beyond just outside the natural capital valuation model, has some pretty, I would say, strict due diligence processes that also includes stakeholder consultation in any project area. So you're looking at about 2-3 layers of stakeholder consultation when it's all said and done. If an investment were to go, if a project were to originate in an NCV assessment and then make its way all the way through the EBRD and come out on the other end as a finance project. So yes, absolutely, that's a huge part of this whole exercise. On the question about how the NCV model is going to change how we invest in our approach to investing, I'm sorry, but I think it's too early. I just don't know. It's quite early days in terms of how we're experimenting with what it can do and the learnings we can take away from it and how we integrate it into our processes. So if you have ideas on potential risks you think we need to be aware of as we go down this path, I'd love to chat because I don't have a crystal ball and I can't tell you where it's going in the future, despite all the good work we've done on these pilot assessments with Arcadis.
Thank you. Maybe Paul, you also want to reflect on that question?
Yes, and on the social question perhaps as well. I mean, I want to give kudos to EBRD. This is remarkable. To take a wastewater plant and think at a million hectares or 100,000 hectares, not many people do that, and that's the problem. You know, we're all doing our projects, we're not thinking about the context that we're operating in. So this is remarkable. It is rocket science, let's be honest about it. It's really clever, and you hire a rocket scientist like Johan or his team to put it together. It's just a decision tool. It gives you a sense of where the important things are. And then it goes to the landscape, and it's up to the people in the landscape to make real sense of that. And they might ignore it. It mightn't have relevance to their life. Although you might use it and see that there's a fantastic way to get 3 of those dots addressed up in the top right-hand corner. A landscape program, if it's built well, benefits all of the players. It floats the smallest boats first. It gives priority to the and that's a principle that we came up with in Scotland, or the landscape came up with in Scotland. That there's a lot of people getting rich on carbon, and it's the rich people who are getting richer on the carbon. The small people are not able to play that game because it's a complex game, and you have to hire rocket scientists. So how do you play it so that everyone benefits? That's the question that the stakeholder group is challenging themselves with, and creating a legal entity so they own it together as a mutual, effectively. You can't. It's not easy to do it, and there's many places where you can't do it, but it is possible.
Maybe I have to agree with Paul. It's rocket science. So the first call with Arcadis and EBRD, I had to have a second call to understand what they're doing, and probably I will have a third call. But I think that the thing is, and the beauty of, we don't know where the piloting is going to end, right? The important thing is we have something to start with. So, and as both gentlemen said, it's the starting discussions. So we need to discuss, we need to evaluate, we need maybe to make some adjustments, but there is something there we can start to work on, and yeah, I'm pretty sure I need more hours with them to to see whether we can use the model for Mercer portfolios and get the valuation of nature capital as well done. So it's not that easy.
Thank you. Yeah, time is running. I think we have time for one more question. The lady here in the front.
It's not a question, it's congratulations actually to the gentleman at Nestlé. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the World Benchmarking Alliance benchmarks every 2 years the top 350 companies in food and agriculture industry, and our last benchmark came out yesterday, and you were number 1 in it amongst all your peers. So the work that you do is acknowledged, and you do pull the system with you. So I just think it's important to acknowledge that.
Thank you. I probably should have said that at the beginning or something.
I wasn't sure if you were aware, to be honest. I think we do. You do engage with us, and we acknowledge the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to throw another comment in to your point here, and obviously I'm finance in an NGO, but I can imagine a world when I see this, where today's oil-rich countries, I can imagine a world where the nature-rich countries in the developing world will be the future wealth when we can put a value on this, and I think that's the target. It's exciting.
Thank you very much.
Can I just very quickly?
Please,
I was also
go
going to, off the back of. Sorry, I did say I could talk about this all day. On the communities piece as well, I think what's interesting is that there's an increasing recognition of the importance of Indigenous communities as owners and stakeholders in their land, and a move away from the sort of the consultation and a move towards the involvement in project design right from the very beginning. And I think as we move towards this sort of strength and robustness of the market, both for carbon and for nature, that's going to become more standard. It's not so much that I design a project, take it and say, do you like it? But more, you start with the community and go, what do you want? What do you need? How can we support you in such a way that you're going to benefit financially? And a lot of that is around the regulation and the policy piece and the policy frameworks that need to be put in place. And it is happening, and information like that coming out of the model is going to help build that process. So we're getting there.
Are there any further reflections from the panelists on what has been discussed?
My final comment only, and then I'm done. I think what I really would like to wish, because right now, if you see all this political discussion about, saving our planet, I have to correct. The planet will survive it. We are saving, and I agree with the lady in the front. It's our well-being, right? I mean, we are discussing about us. The planet probably will survive everything. So maybe for the future, right? Take out the emotions and focus on our own survival and well-being, and get the value and link the return to the amazing opportunity we have right now.
Thank you, Angelica. Paul, and then Owen.
Yeah, if you, just going back to our serious game, don't be disheartened if you're not working at 1 million hectares. There's very few who are. Perhaps Nestle can. All you have to do is exactly the same question that Marshall is answering. If you have a project, think in the scale of 1 million hectares. Your project might be 1 hectare or even less, but think in the scale of 1 million. Get together with others who are thinking in that scale and take action. And that's a landscape approach. And the NCV gives us a way of just thinking about, where's the North Star in where we're going, and checking that it does make logical sense.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on the social impact point, and to say, there are many, many reasons to focus on social impact through the projects, but most of all, it's just a good use of money, right? I mean, if you don't have an economic model that works for a farmer, their ability to implement regenerative agriculture is greatly diminished. If you don't have a model that rewards a smallholder, their capacity not to deforest is diminished because they have to survive. So I think you have to think about economics at the center of it, and livelihoods, and that's what we try to do with our projects. And then on the engagement side, often your forestry projects are just much more effective if you have buy-in from the local community, because they know the area, they know the things that will work, and again, you just get much better return on your investment. So I think it's good to look at it as a moral, ethical issue, but also a financial investment issue too.
Yeah, and maybe I can add to this whole debate that, and I want to congratulate EBRD, the vision that the bank has to go for nature positive and carbon neutrality and a social equitable world is very important, because it starts with the board at the board level. And then it's much easier to achieve all these commitments and actions. But what we see, and nature positive is a fantastic concept. It's the global goal for nature, but what we are facing is the challenge to make it tangible at the landscape level. What does it mean? What are nature positive goals at the landscape level? And that's challenging. And for many companies and financial institutions that want to go for nature positive, they are missing this clarity on nature positive goals. It's difficult for them to come up with nature positive goals at the landscape level. And then the other question is what is a fair share of your individual action towards achieving these nature positive goals at the landscape level? So there are still some hurdles to take. Nature positive is very nice, but the next step, and this is definitely a call for local authorities, but I know it's many countries of the world, that's not easy. And then the question is, what is the role of the financial institution or the company to define these nature positive goals in the landscapes where they are active, and then to contribute to them?
Thank you. We come to the closing of this session, and the picture here in the back is a bridge that is made of the aerial roots of the rubber fig tree. It's a picture from northeastern India, and I think it's a beautiful example that shows how powerful nature is, because these bridges only live when the roots of the trees are healthy, and they can live for hundreds of years. So I think we have had a very interesting exchange today on how we can further upscale this nature positive investment, and I think we have some good tools to do this with a landscape perspective. And I would like to thank all of the speakers for their very inspiring contributions, and all of you for your active involvement and to stay until the end of the day. And we look forward to continue the conversation, and thank you very much.